Welcome to the Film Analysis. Today with the Lord of the Rings series, The Rings of Power. The first episodes are now available on Amazon Prime. Amazon has already confirmed a second season, but I can say at this point, without me, I will not spend one single minute longer with this series. After watching 2 episodes, I can say enough is enough. I'm going to explain myself further, and I would recommend that you follow my example. This series will have cost more than $1 billion after season 2, the highest budget ever spent on a series. Before we discuss its content, let's look at the economics. The Rings of Power has been discussed for years, also due to its high budget. Obviously, movies are supposed to generate revenue. That's not the only reason for the creators, but it is for the money man. However, we should follow a more differentiated approach. First, let's talk about the studio system, which still exists in parts, but used to be very strong in Hollywood, especially in the early 50s and 60s. Back then, movies were produced to sell as many movie tickets as possible. That's the reason why we have movies like Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor. In the 70s and 80s, blockbusters were discovered as a means to appeal to a large mass, the whole family, which remains true for television. For cinema, there exists one similarity with television: linearity. If we have a movie running at a certain time in a theater or on a television program, something else can't be shown at the same time. However, if we talk about streaming, if we talk about Netflix, we observe the principle of parallelism. One film doesn't block the slot or the screen of another. A lot of things are happening at the same time on one platform. Potentially, that makes for a lot of plurality. Netflix has 200 million subscribers, and it doesn't matter to Netflix whether these subscribers all watch this one blockbuster or whether they are distributed across the whole platform. Nevertheless, Netflix produces blockbusters for the masses every now and then, and it succeeds, sometimes better, sometimes worse, as was the case with the studio system. Netflix also produces flops like The Gray Man with Ryan Gosling. Such blockbusters are supposed to generate attention and, above all, attract new subscribers. Let's get back to Amazon Prime. At first glance, the streaming service works like Netflix, but if we take a closer look, the streaming service is only a fraction of Prime, which in turn is only a fraction of Amazon. But Prime represents quite the important business for the large Amazon corporation. Annually, a Prime subscription now costs $139. There was a price increase almost simultaneously with the release of the Lord of the Rings series. The latter legitimizes the price increase. Lord of the Rings supposedly makes Prime worth the cost to its customers. Amazon wants to avoid cancellations. In 2021, Amazon already collected 200 million Prime customers worldwide. The market research institute IHF Cologne writes around 94% of online shoppers in Germany are customers of Amazon. Around 70% of Amazon sales are realized by Prime members, and over a third of them are heavy Amazon shoppers using Amazon services for at least half of their online purchases. We can assume that this is true for many Western countries. Amazon wants to attract more Prime customers with the series. Lord of the Rings is perfect for this strategy because the franchise is a cross-age, cross-class and cross-gender phenomenon. Amazon reaches a lot of people who aren't subscribed to Prime yet, and above all, an audience that doesn't have a digital affinity. Since the episode release stretches over 2 months, a free trial month doesn't suffice for the entire series. However, 2 months allow one to discover other benefits of Prime. Amazon is gaining far more than just $139 a year per customer, and even then you could already extrapolate how quickly you might have arrived at $1 billion. Also, Prime subscribers generally buy more than regular customers. That is quite crucial. Amazon Prime equals an advertising brochure, and the Lord of the Rings series baits the customers. There are also sophisticated series on Prime. Of course, they are catered to a niche audience as well, but it is important to classify the high budget to understand what Amazon is actually about. In addition, it must be considered that Amazon operates on 5 continents but fails to achieve equal success everywhere. Not every country has been as successfully conquered by Amazon as Germany, the UK or the USA. For example, there is tough competition in Latin America and other regions of the world. But by having such a Lord of the Rings series, you are unrivaled. We must keep the subscriber calculation in mind to develop an educated understanding of the series, even more so as the economic intention, namely the acquisition of new Prime customers, shapes the series' aesthetics. Sure, there is a director, Juan Antonio Bayona. He's responsible for the first 2 episodes, but his work lacks a signature style. It could be a team, it could be anyone. The director only serves as an executive force. In principle, commerce and art are quite compatible. There are, after all, big blockbusters that are artistically valuable. But in the case of this series, we don't find that at all. The subscriber calculation has dominated the aesthetics so much that we can't find anything artistically ambitious in this series at all. In view of the budget, some will say somewhat reverently, the abundant costs deny any criticism. But that's wrong. Exactly the opposite is true. Something that costs so much must justify itself, especially, and this series fails to deliver from an artistic point of view. In terms of subscriber calculus, this series may be justified, but true film lovers will have to settle for mediocrity. Screaming at you at every turn, look how expensive I am. Generating opulent and impeccably crafted images with high budgets is something any idiot can do, really. The photographer Peter Lindbergh once said, as he was praised for a photo on a skyscraper, well, when you are there with a top model and you have the best equipment in the world, you are on a skyscraper in New York and you have a super professional big team, it's very difficult to take a bad photo. That's why we have to understand the art consists of creating an outstanding photo or an outstanding film. Denis Villeneuve succeeded with Dune, but not because of the monstrous budget of $165 million. He succeeded in making a great piece of art. One must almost say, even though this film was almost drowning in money, Villeneuve managed to form a style not seen before. this is also crucial in fashion. If you really design a fashion icon, you might need high quality fabrics. Let's think of Coco Chanel's LBD. But it's not about beating it to death with money by studding everything with diamonds. Unfortunately, that's the way fashion is in many cases today. Let's also think of the sneaker hype. At the same time, you can be image rich with very little money. Let's think of Midsommar by Ari Aster, amounting to only $9 million. That would also have been possible. Centering artistic aspects, you would either have needed someone like Villeneuve, leaving his own mark no matter the budget, delivering a unique style, or you would have said, we can do a lot of the Ring series, but with only 20 or 30 million, and we need someone doing their magic without hundreds of millions, like Ari Aster. But the Rings of Power is supposed to appeal to an audience that hasn't really been interested in streaming, that maybe isn't that interested in movies per se or in quality series, an audience most affected by spectacle. They are very expensive but completely banal pictures. The series is of astonishing ordinariness. Hence the series presentation on Amazon's homepage. Everyone talks about this series. One may think to oneself, well then, I'll watch it now too. I know Lord of the Rings to some extent, like the people suddenly enthusiastic about soccer during the World Cup, having never watched a single soccer game before. We shall say little about the plot, and I would say that's for the best. We are in the Second Age in Middle-earth, the elves hunt Sauron and the hobbits eat blackberries. It is told in a tremendous slowness. The images revel in themselves, but they have nothing to tell us. A phenomenon blandly observable in many series as of now. While a 90-minute piece sufficed, 10 episodes of nonsense are rolled out. In addition, there are these lofty dialogues. For example, Elrond says, "Finor's hammer, the tool that wrought the Silmarils, the jewels that contain the very light of Valinor." Strange, isn't it? How one object could be responsible for creating so much beauty and so much pain. Celebrimbor answers, "True creation requires sacrifice. They say that Morgoth found the Silmarils so beautiful that after he'd stolen them, for weeks he could do nothing but stare into their depths. It was only after one of his tears fell upon the jewels and he was faced with the evil of his own reflection that the reverie was finally broken. From that moment he looked upon their light no more. Finor's work nearly turned the heart of the great foe himself. What has mine ever accomplished?" Or we are confronted with wisdom, for example, and now it becomes poetic. The same wind that seeks to blow out a fire may also cause its spread. Yes, quite true. To this end, the stage outfits of Renaissance fair are reapplied, and the elves have hairstyles as they used to be depicted on hairspray cans. Peter Jackson films have aged quite poorly these days. This series will do the same. We need to talk about kitsch. This term is quickly attached where it does not apply. Everything that is loud and shrill doesn't necessarily belong to kitsch. Trash is not equal to kitsch. The Rings of Power depicts very well what kitsch represents. Let's try a definition naming 5 characteristics. First, kitsch always claims seriousness. This could be felt in sad dialogue excerpts. That's how the series works incessantly, pacing the scenery with holy seriousness the whole time. Second, kitsch presents the ordinary and predictable as a surprise. In the series, everything looks the way you think it will. That's how it must have looked there in this second age in Middle-earth. It is a very childish reception. All the clichés you have in mind are realized. Oh well, that's the fantasy genre today. It all looks exactly as you imagine it. Of course, if you online racists are now yelling that black elves didn't exist, well, that's especially silly, dealing with ridiculous tribalistic identity politics in the fantasy genre. Anything should be possible in fantasy, but the series is not entirely innocent of such a sinister reception. Although we are dealing with fantasy, the Lord of the Rings cosmos in cinema is always about illustration. You just want to have such a Tolkien naturalism, and that's why everything should look like it's been written down in Tolkien's creation somewhere. It's all exactly as you imagine it. It's the opposite of fantasy. Here the individual is not empowered to open a new space, to be confronted with something. But it's just a matter of what had already seeped in through many standard fantasy images that one has already seen, being confirmed here once again. The film is like a coloring book. Everything looks even more beautiful, splendid even. Just do not paint outside the lines. Thirdly, since kitsch only confronts the audience with what is already known, kitsch is never original. Ah yes, that's exactly how one imagines a fantasy film. That's why this series, even though Amazon claims it, doesn't represent an event series. It completely lacks the event, the suddenness, experiencing something new. Instead, we witness the 90s fantasy aesthetics only now in HD. Fourth, in kitsch, the style of glossing everything over reigns. A shortcoming or several shortcomings in content or form are glossed over. We don't see any adherence to form here, but the series sticks to its style. It's glossed over with stilted language, incredibly bombastic images, and quite the budget. Bombast characterizes every scene and shows in every detail. Each basket for collecting blackberries must have been very expensive, employing 7 people from the set team. Fifth, kitsch convinces the audience, and it does so in an emotional way. The audience is not supposed to think, but to agree. It is supposed to surrender and accept the message. There's good, there's evil, here's light, there's darkness. A tremendously tasteless series. You could say that it's not that difficult to create something so tasteless with so much money. Well, you can hire a great architect to build a house, but if you still have a few millions left over to gild the whole house and equip it with diamonds, it will probably become a very tasteless house. It takes a lot of money to look that cheap. But that's what's happening here. Let's think of the bling in tourist places like Dubai, which we are seeing more and more nowadays, even though inequality is growing. Tasteless luxury is staged as desirable. The series is expensive but lacks taste, as is true for many people and series nowadays. Even though the world of the elves seems to detached from our present, it echoes the primitive pomp of our modern luxury hotels and shopping malls. We are only one step away from Jeff Bezos' yacht, which is said to have cost half as much as the series. But how precious is our lifetime to us? This series represents a terrible waste of time. One can experience much more beautiful, much more interesting, much more original things with our few days on this earth. With this series, we only watch but refuse to see. It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.